Well, John, thank you so much for joining us here on the Build podcast. It's great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Blake. Yeah, it's really great to be here.
So you recently told me that your role as a sales leader is really to be more of a sales puzzle master or a sales problem solver. So I guess what exactly does this mean, and how have you seen this play out in your career?
Yeah, that's funny that you remember that. But yeah, I think that, it's just probably like the way that I think about, kind of my role, leading and building new go-to-markets. I do feel like, you all do a great job of highlighting this, but, sales is changing. The world of, buying is changing. The way that consumers consume is changing. And so I think, the successful sales leaders are the ones that understand, how that evolution's happening and how to embrace it and really kind of lean into it. And so, I think probably like one of my strengths as a sales leader is that I've, worked in different contexts, different backgrounds. And so I think whenever I come into a different solution, I bring lots of pattern recognition and things that have worked well for me in my past, but I'm always kind of thinking like, what pieces do I want to borrow, from other things that I've done? What are some new things that I want to introduce? And so I think that's what really kind of makes it fun is it's not a one size fits all, show up every day with a playbook that I know that's tried and true. It's, it's always kind of having kind of a certain element of like experimentation and being able to figure out what works, in a new and evolving context.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. The one thing I wrote down as you were talking was playbooks. Because certainly as a VC, I see this a lot. That a new sales leader comes in. Is this a playbook person, or is this somebody who really thinks about things kind of on a case by case basis? Because the playbook person, it's like, well, this is what I used for the last 10 years, so I'm coming in, and this is the show that I run, and kind of get on board or don't. And it's sort of very myopically focused, sort of one way to look at the world. Versus what I'm hearing from you, this idea of being, a problem solver and thinking of things. Really, it's thinking of things from first principles. What is actually this product? Who is the customer? Who buys this? What's their buyer's journey look like? And let's tailor the sales approach to that context, as opposed to just, I have my playbook that's worked for the last decade and I'm just going to rinse and repeat in every new company that I join.
Yeah. I feel like PLG is at the front of that. I do feel like this is kind of one of the major trends that shows this evolution. And so I do think like, being able to adapt, learn. I listen to a ton of podcasts from my peers, even in the industry, because I think that's the neat thing. I think a lot of us are all kind of figuring this out together, and that's what gets me, excited. As probably one of the older dogs too. I feel like, that's what's, kind of really neat to me is that, you can, reinvent new ways to do this. The solutions aren't always the ones that worked in the past year.
Yeah, and that's a great transition into the topic of the day, which is sales in a PLG environment, and more specifically, if you're starting as a PLG company, you're typically starting with the classic bottoms up motion, the self-service motion, but at some point, it's going to make sense to add a top-down motion to complement that. And this is obviously something that is a new context in the software world, and so you can't use old playbooks, and so this is perfect to sort of understand, how do you actually problem solve this? What does this look like in practice? And you have some amazing experience from Canva and many other great PLG companies where you've done this in real life. So we're going to unpack that in detail today, because many founders are going through this challenge. They're trying to figure out, do I add top down? Is now the time to add top down? How exactly do I do this? What does this look like? It's so different from what we've been doing thus far. So before we get into that, let's set the stage. What's actually happening in a company at this point that will tell you need to add top down? What does it look like? What signals should you be watching for? What stage does this happen for a PLG company?
Yeah. Look, I think it varies by company, which is always a bad answer for this, so there's not like this always ironclad, like this is the immediate sign, that it happens. But I would say like, so there are some basic things to look out for. Like I think, at Rackspace and WP Engine and at Canva, we had started to land, at different times, our biggest customer, an enterprise brand. And that was when it was like, okay, it's maybe time to think about things differently, right? We started to get, this bigger customer that was exhibiting some different buying behaviors. Everybody was really excited about it. And so I think it was, really that's kind of sign number one, is when you start to get some, your first big customer, and then hopefully some repeatability in some of these bigger customers. And then, like we talked about this, in past conversations too, like looking for different kind of stall points along the way, like what is, causing, some of these deals to either stall out or just grow to a certain size and not continue to grow. And so, kind of looking, at the data, I think data is kind of your best friend in guiding this. With Canva, we saw that, we were getting into a lot of, big enterprises, but we were only landing, team sizes of 40, 50, maybe, 60 employees in companies that had thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of users, right? So we were just scratching the surface. And so it was like, okay, for us, that was a stall point. It was like, okay, there's, obviously interest in the enterprise, but they're only getting to this certain size. Why is that? And we knew that the opportunity was that much bigger on the other side of this. So it was like, okay, we need to unpack this and understand it, and then I think, WP Engine was the same. Like, it was a lot of self sign up. And then we moved in kind of SMB and mid market. And then we started to land some really big names, right? And then we quickly learned like how they bought was different. Like, they had security reviews that we had to run, run through with them. We had to, go through legal negotiations. We had to do a number of things that just were a barrier to them getting any bigger with us, right? We could do a lot of little small deals with big enterprise, which to me is, kind of sales hell. It's like this, opportunity is massive on the other side and you just can't quite get to it. And I think that's when you start to think about, how do I introduce a human element, through this top-down motion? I even think about it like, the top-down motion, there's ways to kind of leg into it, or ease your way into it. Like, I've talked to, a lot of companies, that are going through this transition, and they can even see like early phase of like, we can get adoption in enterprise, but we see certain users sign up but abandon like partially through the process, right? So there's some problems with the sign up process, or they're not seeing enough value on the other side to complete it. And so they introduced I'd say a light touch kind of sales motion, but it was someone who could come in and really like educate, guide, coach them through the sign up process and get them to the other side to get them adopting. So I think just looking for those different stall points and figuring out where they are, and then, when to kind of phase in the different elements and pieces is like the real kind of key and magic to this.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, and I'm kind of hearing two big buckets of things that are happening in the context of the company that will tell you now's the time. One is a little bit more intuitive and clear to me. The other was a little bit more counterintuitive. But the clear and intuitive one is, and this is classic for PLG, is that the customers pull you there.
Yep.
And so, you land and then you do the bottom up, and eventually the bottom up goes high enough up that now you have to have a real sales conversation. And so the customers are pulling you, the market is pulling you up market to embrace the enterprise. And so that's a really good signal. We got our first big deal. We had no idea what we were doing. We pulled out all the stops. There was a bunch of diving catches and Herculean efforts to get that deal across the finish line, but we got it. So I'm sure there's more of them. Let's build a process around this. So that's kind of the more intuitive, clear example to me in the PLG world. But the other bucket, the less intuitive or counterintuitive to me at least, example you gave is stall points. So what happens if you get to a certain point and you're getting pulled to a certain point, and you should get pulled further? There's a lot more seats to get in this account, but we're not getting them. And we consistently seem to be not getting them. We always reach a ceiling that isn't the actual ceiling in the account. And so looking at that and inspecting that and saying, well, why is that happening? Is there friction, or is there just a buying process that has to happen that we haven't enabled inside the customer account? And looking for those stall points, I think it's both the evidence of market pull or the absence of market pull that should be there. And one of those two factors is going to tell you now's the time.
Yeah, you'll find it. I do think like a lot of them, look, the neat thing is, how far you can get with someone pulling out a corporate card. I think that's the really neat thing in enterprise, is that you can see, a good amount of adoption. But I think like that's another national one, like certain, thresholds get triggered, on a corporate card where you can no longer get away with kind of, sliding it under the radar and kind of doing it on your own. You need to bring in procurement, other folks like that. I think that's when it needs more hand holding, and that's just an obvious kind of easy stall point to see. And I think, look, I back to kind of the puzzle solver kind of, problem, solver kind of, analogy we started with here. Look, I always try and look at those things and think about like, how do you not overdo it? How do you come in with like a lightweight way to still kind of move through those stall points? Because I think the customers will value that, and you'll get a ton out of it, because you can minimize, a lot of your sales costs here. But I mean, a good example of this is like legal agreements. Like, I think that when you get into enterprise, it's just natural that someone's going to ask for like, what is the legal agreements that we signed up under here? We'd like to review them. And I've seen, teams overly do them, and actually like drop the binder on someone and say, okay, here's this, overly legalese, contract. And I've often kind of skewed towards like, let's make it simple. Can we make it, one page or less? Can we make it, hugely customer empowering? Can we make it something that, everybody in their right mind would sign up for easily? And it gives us the right amount of protections, right? We want to make sure that we're not putting ourselves in jeopardy, but we don't want to overcomplicate things so that they can kind of, look at the terms, go through them, hopefully click through them if they can without having to do, a legal review. I mean, that's one example of how you hopefully can maximize these stall points, and do it without a heavy human element there, and just make it easier for buyers to buy.
So that kind of sets the stage with the context of what's happening inside a company. In many ways, that's the when of the problem. When do I start thinking about this? When do I do this? What should I be looking for in my company? So the next question for me is, well, why? Why should companies embrace it and not avoid it? For me, I certainly have often run into PLG purist founders who don't want to embrace the top-down motion, or perhaps think that their company can be successful in the enterprise without it. And maybe we're exempt from needing to do that. That's an old school way of thinking. So to me, I definitely don't think it's optional. I think it's a necessity for all PLG companies at some point in their journey. But I'm curious what you think. Why is it so important to embrace this top-down motion and this top-down moment and not avoid it?
Yeah. Look, I see this one often as well. And I get it. I guess I get both sides. And I think, PLG is a beautiful thing. So I understand the purist point of view, and the, willingness or the want to avoid it here. And I think actually I would say to those founders, like, maximize it for as long as you can, stretch that runway, for as long as you can. But I struggle to see, going all the way. And I've even looked for use cases and examples of companies that have done it really well. And it always, is inevitable. It's kind of like fighting gravity. At certain points, when you get a sizable enough engagement with an enterprise, the expectations of what they want you to provide is different, right? And so, they're going to look for dedicated teams and dedicated points of contact. They want escalated support. They want, kind of different, kind of models of, how they get treated, right? I mentioned security reviews, like they'll have all these requirements and hoops that you'll need to jump through. And so making sure that you're on top of those and knowing, how they, play, with that customer scenario and work together with that scenario. And so those all are going to be the kind of the natural gravity that comes in, and you have to have, those teams in place, or, you'll tend to have, a lot of, small deals with large enterprises, which, is it can be a major headache, right? Because you'll still probably get dragged into a lot of those things. You'll end up having to do a legal review one-off. You'll have to come up with some kind of support model to support them, right? And so you'll either get kind of stuck in sales hell, doing small deals to big companies, where there's a lot of upside, and also, obviously also probably working, a lot harder because you're creating a lot of one-off scenarios and solutions which don't scale. And so I think that's when, it's important to think about, like, what is the time, if you're serious about it, what is the time to make that shift? What is the time to make that pivot? And then go all in on it. I think that's like something that really, I talk to a lot of PLG founders about, is like, make that decision when the time is right. And then, like, don't do it half-heartedly. Like, you got to go all in, you got to support it. And, there's lots of ways to support it, but I think that's the other thing that's really kind of key, is like, don't avoid it. It's inevitable and it's kind of natural gravity. And then when you get there, go all in on it.
Yeah, it kind of makes sense to me to look at it through the lens of customer success, not as a discipline, but as a philosophy of clearly everybody wants customer success. They want their customers to be successful, and going up market and enabling that motion that allows you to go up market or to expand to the full potential in a large account is really the concept of having more customers be more successful with your product. And so why would you want to draw an artificial line in the sand and say, we will, across this line, we will not go further, versus let's just maximize customer success for the most people possible. And I think when you reframe it that way, of course, everybody wants that. I want all the customers, and I want them all to be successful, and I want them all to be happy. And I don't want there to be, untapped opportunity, untapped seats in an account. So let's lean in. So I think that's kind of one way to look at it. The other way, and you're starting to imply this a little bit, is you could get stuck. And if you get stuck as a tactical tool that never really breaks out and never really gets larger deals, never really gets wider adoption, one, that's going to, the stall points in your deals at some point will lead to stall points in your company. And then also it opens up the landscape for competitors. That if you don't do it, somebody else will do it. If you don't enable that motion, if you don't enable enterprises to adopt your product, then your competitor or somebody else, or perhaps an incumbent, is going to come along and they're going to do it, and you can be leapfrogged. And so the amazing momentum you had, the amazing opportunity you created for yourself with PLG to disrupt the market, now might be missing. It might be lacking. You might miss that opportunity because somebody else kind of fills that vacuum that you're not filling.
100% agree.
Yeah. So if that's the why, and we need to not avoid this moment and definitely embrace this moment, let's get into the what. And I think the what of this topic in many ways is the strategy. So how would you personally describe the strategy from the 30,000 foot view level of combining bottom up and top down? What are some of the new capabilities you're going to need to develop and things you're going to have to think about as a go-to-market organization?
Yeah. I'll talk through some of like the elements of the strategy, and then I'd like to make it real and probably just use some examples from my past. But I think that's I think that the key is when you have these entry points, right? You're really kind of getting this kind of proof of concept. I would say is the way we looked at it with a lot of the companies that I've led here. We have this team that's utilizing it, right? So they become kind of this champion for us that we're able to make successful and use as kind of business case to the business. And that's the really fun part about this is being able to take that now to decision maker. In our context of Canva, it was the CMO, but being able to talk to them about this huge value add that we could bring to their organization, how we could make them more efficient, how we could really, help their team scale in effective ways. And then really kind of draw back to this team that had kind of already signed up on their own, right? Using them as this, great positive kind of, beacon of light that we can start with here, use as a, kind of point of success to really, help scale this to the rest of the business. And that was really, a lot of times our storyline there, when we'd go to the, to the CMO, a lot of times they hadn't even heard of us, because we had kind of come in through, a user making this decision on their own, maybe scaling it to their immediate team. And we wanted to play for, bigger stakes than that and really go for that, kind of end-to-end wall-to-wall deployment. And so, being able to come in and really kind of drive home all those key elements, I think was the big thing for us. Also being able to show the usage and adoption is, a positive in that, I think oftentimes, the wall of resistance you hit is, it's going to be really hard for us to adopt a new tool. We've already got tool exhaustion. We just implemented X, Y, Z. And so to be able to say that it's already happening with some virality, and teams have already kind of selected, this tool, and they're getting so much value out of it already. You can go talk to them firsthand. I think that really, helped us kind of speed the path up and really, in the end, also kind of shorten the sales cycles, going from virtually unheard of, in the CMO's mind, to them not even knowing they had this problem, to quickly getting them, alive and alert to this big problem, and then the solution that we can kind of help drive with them there.
So what I'm hearing about, these capabilities and the strategic view is that you've gotten the initial adoption, you've gotten the initial land through self-service, might have come from an individual end user, might have come from a small team, but you're getting that initial adoption. And then now, in order to unlock the additional adoption and to get that larger deal, you need to find more helpers inside the account.
Yep.
And in many ways, you have to find the champion who's going to be able to sponsor that big purchase. You mentioned for Canva, it was the CMO. And so you need to find that persona, you need to find that buyer, if you will, and then you need to start speaking their language, which their language is going to be much more about business value, making the business case, proving the ROI. And what I'm hearing from you is that you can leverage in many ways the usage you already have as in many ways kind of like a POC. Here's what your team is already doing with it. Here's the results that they're seeing. Let's translate that into this business value speak, this business case speak, this ROI speak that's really important to this new buyer persona that we've identified.
Yep, that's exactly it. I mean, I think, and it does take some transitioning. I think, the immediate use case, you often think about how you're going to make that team's, life better, easier, their job, becomes more, easy to accomplish, and it makes them more successful in their role. And then when you move to the CMO and, further up the chain, look, it is about that broader impact. It's about making, the larger organization more efficient. And so you have to be able to switch gears and understand that. And I think that's also a common mistake I see, is some people think like, what worked for the initial team to get on the platform, is going to resonate, and oftentimes that falls flat. And so I think it's important to understand that you are kind of traversing a whole new course here, with a whole new, kind of buyer persona that you need to address and really speak to them in their language there.
Yeah, and maybe unpacking, this language that they speak and the concept of business value a little bit more. Oftentimes when you have the initial adoption from end users using a PLG product, they might not think about it in ROI terms. They might think about it in terms of this. This is just a better product. I like this product. Personal preference is to use this product. I can't imagine my life without this product. And that's all really good stuff, but that's kind of personal preference orientation. And then maybe if they were really sort of pressured on it, they might say, well, yeah, but it helps me save time.
Yep.
And so it's personal preference and time savings oftentimes for the initial adoption. But as you start to speak to this, executive persona, personal preference and merely time savings usually isn't good enough. So what do you have to actually communicate instead?
Yeah. Yeah. You nailed it. Like I was going to say, I think they oftentimes don't, understand that, right? They just think it, again, the common words they use are, it makes my life easier, or it helps me do my job more effectively, or it makes me stand out from my peers. Right. But I think it really does, come down to, even bigger, I think you nailed it. I think one of the keys is they can be really helpful in helping you drive that story, getting them to quantify hours saved, time and efficiency will ultimately build into that ROI. And so I think if you can get it from the users, like that's massive. I think that'll be really helpful. And we did that a couple of ways, actually, like by surveying some of the users after some of the proof of concept, and we tried to drive them towards some of the things that would be great inputs for an ROI calculator. But I think it is, at the end of the day, it does come down to dollars and cents, and taking that time and calculating it into how you make the team more efficient, how you help them maybe hire more effectively, because they don't have to hire as many people in one category over another, right? And so that they can save on costs and those things. Those are the things that ultimately need to come from that, so that you can make that you can traverse that new chasm and make it to that new buyer, and speak in a language that's going to make a lot of sense, especially with a lot of these tools too. Like I hear this often too. A lot of these great PLG companies, are creating categories. They're creating, solutions to problems that didn't exist before. And so in a lot of ways, that's even trickier, because it's not like, hey, I want to replace X with Y, and you can take your cost of X and replace it with Y. And, sure, we're a little bit more expensive, but it's, we're worth it. Like you're actually asking them for budget they may not have identified already, to think about, where they could get, pull, some, dollars and budget to be able to afford a tool for maybe a problem that they didn't even know existed. So I think that gets even more tricky. And just a lot, you have to be good at telling the story of like how, the world, with this product in place is going to be a better one for them. It's going to save them money. It's going to make them more effective. Again, speaking in the languages of things that matter to them.
And another thing that I see happen here, and really kind of what's behind all this, is that when you make this transition from solely a bottom-up starting point to then adding the top-down motion in order to access larger deals and access larger companies, really it's ultimately you're also at the same time making a transition from a software tool to a business solution. Or the lingo people often use is a platform, which is platforms in the eyes of the beholder, and it's very subjective. But
Yep.
I do think that this crossing the chasm from a tool of one of many tools in a tool stack or a toolbox to no, this is an actual business solution that's driving business value for us. And this communicating the business value is one of those things that does that, communicating the ROI. But it's also just the overall positioning, storytelling, and messaging as well. And so what's important there, this probably brings in both sales messaging as well as product marketing and that kind of thing. But how do you need to speak differently in order to not be perceived as, just a tactical tool, but actually a business solution?
Yeah, I think it just comes back to more of that broader context story, right? It's not just helping one person, be better at their job. It's helping teams and departments and units and helping different departments and teams and units function better together, right? That's where the platform story comes in. I think, just in a simple, basic way, too, like I always want, our products to be kind of mission critical. And that's also how I kind of anchor to that. And that if we can build the right products, and if we can position them correctly, and if we can implement them correctly, hopefully we become mission critical. And that, if you rip it out, there would be major pain and upheaval, and bad things would happen. I think, like, and there's lots of products that you can draw on that you can probably think of in your day to day that kind of have really made that jump. Like Slack being one of them. I talked to someone recently who was like, we had to change from Slack to Microsoft, and when we switched over, it impacted the culture of the company like dramatically. Like we could tell that it had this massive change. And you think something as simple as a tool could be easily replaced, or some people want to think that they can be easily replaced. But I think that's a good example of how they became part of the fabric of how the teams work together, and became mission critical, and became that platform. Which is really important. And I think it's on multiple people's minds on how you get there, right? It's on the product teams to build a product that is that sticky, and that is that virally adopted, and then also that painful to remove out of their hands if that were to ever happen there. It's important for the sales teams and customer success teams to put it in the right hands, get it into the right teams, make sure it's implemented correctly, make sure that your ongoing teaching, training, that they're maximizing getting the value out of it. Obviously product marketing and marketing play a big part in this, with getting the message straight and making sure that it's understood in that context. But I think that's a big jump. But I think that also is the one that will mean the difference between, again, tens and hundreds of users to thousands of users on the platform when you make that jump.
So we've talked about the when, which is the context in the company, what to be looking for. We talked about the why this is important to embrace and not avoid or think you're exempt from. We just talked about the what, the strategy, and what capabilities you need to develop. So let's get to the how. What does this actually look like in practice, day to day, for somebody who's trying to execute this strategy? So we can pull this to one of your personal examples, Canva. Canva has millions of users. And so if I'm an AE at Canva trying to do this top-down stuff, where do I even begin? Do I just call user number one and then sort of call down the list? Or is there a way that I actually, action this in real life that's a little bit more strategic?
Yeah. And before I jump into that, actually, I think that my answer, one of the things that I think is going to be really important and is going to be a part of my answer, is the data component. And I do think, like every company I've worked at, data, gets unruly, it gets, unstructured, it gets hard to access or understand, or we didn't capture the right data in the early days, but now we do today. And so I think, like, if I could, get through to, one team today, I would say, like, the importance of data and getting it right in the beginning is awesome. And I think is, like, so important. And I have talked to so many, companies that are going through this growth journey, and they put their eye on this early. And I'm like, okay, that's amazing. Cause I think, I think in some ways did it well, but we just, like everybody else, grew really fast. And as you mentioned, had tens of millions of users on the platform when we decided to add this top-down motion in. And so it really was this complete needle in a haystack, moment here. It was a massive haystack. And I think as an AE, like in the beginnings, we did the rough kind of, I would say, kind of caveman methods to get things up and going. If you were an AE on my team, what you found was you would look for, patterns of adoption that you could quickly access and get to it. So, who with this corporate domain is using, the product here, who's signing up, the most recently, is it a team of 10, 20? Are they starting to grow? That's a key indicator that we've got, obviously some adoption swell growing in this organization. So it's time to reach out to that, kind of executive, to see if we can get them to foster a larger deployment there. Over time, we started to learn that there were, obviously a lot of shortcomings to that method. And, that's where we really started to, invest in kind of our data stack, our, BI that sat on top of this, even a lot of the triggers of, like, when this happens, who engages, with what kind of story and message. And I think that's the fun part when you get into there, because we really started to learn that, 40 users at a company doesn't always necessarily mean that you've got a team adopting. You could have 40 users who signed up independent of each other, didn't even know each other, And they may all be using this for something that they're doing on the side, right? And so like, we quickly found some gaps like that. And so we were looking for, are these teams, that are working together? Are they showing patterns of behavior like creating designs and sharing them? Are they inviting more people to be a part of their team? Okay, this is showing that this is more, kind of B2B usage here. This is more team focused usage. Like let's strike now and like let's get somebody in front of them to talk through that. I think the other thing too is like even using the email domain. We really invested a lot in enrichment, understanding that because over the pandemic we found that email became I think even more muddy. I think there's a lot of people because we were working from home and work and life quickly converged over that time. People were probably a little less cognizant of using like my personal email versus my work email, and so we saw a spike in actually corporate emails for sign up. And so we quickly learned that doesn't always necessarily mean corporate adoption. On the inverse of this, we still have a lot of folks in the database and in our user set that we're drawing on that use Gmail accounts. And so how do you know that, Blake at Gmail and John at Gmail, are actually at some really massive company and that they don't go under the radar, right? How do we identify those needles in the haystack quickly? And how do we make sure that we're tracking on the right patterns of behavior to see that they're starting to do some things that are really interesting and compelling. And we probably want to, insert somebody here, maybe customer success, maybe it is our, Canva coaches who do kind of the onboarding experience and make sure that they're getting the value out of it. Maybe it's an AE because we see, this, 40-person team, but we know that, that company has over 100,000 employees. And so, really 40 is just a drop in the ocean and really represents a much more massive opportunity if you put the right players on the play, on the field and the right team in place.
So at the highest level, you're looking for signals to indicate where is adoption happening, where is their activity happening in this big, massive user base, and then I'll focus my attention there. And these signals really come from product analytics. What's happening in the product? What's the usage that we're seeing, or the user growth that we're seeing, inside the product? And so wiring up product analytics and exposing that to a sales team is super important, which makes a lot of sense to me. Does this really ultimately get at PQLs, or does this look like something else in practice?
Yeah, no, I think actually understanding that, the difference there too. I mean, MQLs and PQLs, building in, that level of like scrutiny there, understanding how each of them behave too, I think is like the other thing that we really got good at was, building some discipline and rigor. I think in the early days, we treated, everything as a lead, right? It was like, it came to us from inbound, they're not on the platform, this is a team on the platform. So understanding, what each of them are, and then what team works with, what I think is also key there, which again, we didn't have in the beginning days. And so I think that's, fairly common. Like everybody works on everything. And I think, getting more specific around the roles you introduce, the timing of when the roles get involved here and how they may team up, work together, or not even, kind of touch a customer. I think that's the important thing. I think, and also I think the neat thing about this, we've talked, a ton about, the sequencing and when, and, the how and the why. Really, I think, again, that it's not a one size fits all you're putting in place here. Like really think about like, how do you put the right touch, in the right place? So, having, one or two or three, potential roles that you're kind of introducing in here. And making sure that like not everybody gets like an overly, kind of enterprise sales experience, right? I think like, we have, we don't put AEs, on entry point kind of, deployments here, those proof of concepts, until they reach a certain size, right? So using data to dictate like when does an AE get involved, and there's, some companies that we want to get on ASAP because they have so much potential, and there's some that are so small that it's like, okay, they'll never really need that resourcing, and they probably don't want that. And so like, let's make sure that we kind of surround them with the right, kind of model that supports their growth and their deployments. And so I think just being very kind of smart and deliberate in scaling these things in the right increments with the right touches is really key here.
Yeah. So there's kind of three legs of this stool. One, if you're thinking about product usage growth and product user growth, those are some of the signals to indicate, all right, there's activity happening in this subset of accounts. Then you're going to kind of look at, all right, well, tell me a little bit more about those accounts. You mentioned email enrichment and some of those things. What can we learn about these organizations? Is this an organization that's in our ICP? Are there actually more seats to go get? How many more seats are there to get? Let's make sure that there's activity. Let's make sure that the accounts are fit. And then the next piece is the actual people, the personas themselves. And this idea of the right person, the right touch at the right time is incredibly important. So getting a little bit more zoomed in on some of what we talked about at the beginning, which is that you're going to have to speak to a new persona. You're going to have to speak not just to the end users of the product, but to the executives who own that team, control the budget, and are thinking about the business solutions. And so this kind of three legs of the stool: the activity that's happening to tell you where to focus. Then, is this a good account that's in our ICP? Is the potential there? Okay, great. Let's find the right people. Let's give them the right touches at the right time to kind of unblock the customer journey and get them to the next stage. So the data ties all of that stuff together, so that you're not just brute forcing it and calling everybody that uses Canva. You're being very targeted and strategic about it.
Yep, 100%.
So I want to zoom all the way out as we close out the conversation here. So we've been talking obviously a lot about the sales strategy and the sales team and all of the details of this in real life, but it's important to remember that the majority of the company is not on the sales team. And this can be a really big cultural change for a PLG startup. The type of thinking that you'll see is, we've been successful without sales up to this point, so why do we need it now? And so maybe give a little bit of a view to that. How do you think about change management for the broader organization? How do you message the role of sales, and how do you get the whole company working with sales as opposed to against sales, or just viewing it as this sort of sideshow?
Yeah, that's awesome. I think it's a good one to think about. And I actually have heard a number of folks come on your podcast and talk about this. I mean, for context, when I joined Canva, I was one of the first sales hires in a 1,000-person company, probably at the time. And so we really were a small sliver of the overall entity. And so I got, lots of, we actually had regular kind of meetups and, kind of virtual coffees, that we would do. And, the common question I got is like, what is sales? Like, I feel like you all like dress fancy and talk fast, and so, it was a lot of dispelling the myth, just around that. And I think I, really leaned into and enjoyed that part of this, was, helping the company understand that. And I would say like part of my role was, being like a chief storyteller, really, one, spending a lot of time, outside of my, kind of immediate sphere and spending time with products, spending time with marketing, spending time with support, like really diving into the trenches and helping them, kind of understand the value that we can drive together. And then I think also, working to just get on a regular cadence of, we had brown bags, with my sales team where they would talk about, product requirements to the product team, which I think was really great. They were thirsty and really wanted a lot of input from them. What the product was doing well for customers and what it wasn't. And so I think that was a great, opportunity. We had a regular cadence of, almost every month, standing up in front of the company in company meetings. Mel and Cliff were great about giving us time to showcase this, but talking about, the deals that we won and really telling the story of like how they started as a initial team, using the platform, and they grew from that 40 to thousands. And I, really, love to hit home the, kind of the key elements being that like, it wasn't, one over the other that made this win successful. It was the combined story. And we have a major focus on social responsibility. And so it was like even better to highlight those ones where it was like, okay, not only are we, growing adoption of the platform faster than we could have done, with just a pure PLG motion, we're helping, some really impactful teams do some really impactful work. And so that was, really the fun part, was like being able to highlight those stories over and over again. And that was, for me, the moment, when we would do those, every couple of weeks, I'd hear afterwards, like, that was great. That helped me understand, like, what if we did this for that customer? When he told us that story, it really made me think about, this feature that we wanted to roll out. So I think just being, very repetitive, at times, probably having to just kind of rinse, wash, repeat. But basically helping the company understand how this small kind of nimble team that's being built within the organization can have a massive impact and really can drive, towards the, the common goals that we're all marching towards.
So what I'm hearing is that doing this transition where you add top down in order to effectively embrace the enterprise, and you do it through adding a sales motion, this is a team sport.
Yep.
It is not a
100%.
sales problem only. It is not a sales thing only. Like those people over there, they're dialing for dollars. Like they're going to do their thing. This is a whole company thing. And so recognizing that, going to the enterprise and sort of starting this next phase of the journey as a PLG company is a team sport, a team-wide sport. Everybody in the organization needs to be on board with it. And so then that puts the onus on leadership, sales leadership, I think in particular, but certainly executive leadership above that as well, to do the storytelling and to give the context of this is a team sport and here's what it looks like. Here's your role in this team sport. Here's why this is absolutely critical in order to get us to the next level. Again, all through the lens of customer success, not like your team has
Yep.
to help my team because my team's more important. It's like we all have a shared goal, more customers being more successful with our product, getting full adoption, realizing their full potential using us. And it's going to take everybody to do that. And so embracing that team sport, embracing that sort of everybody has a role to play, and then constantly messaging that and leading with that sort of orientation is the thing that sort of leads to success together and shared success as a team, as opposed to organ rejection.
Yep. Yep. I think actually just like some more kind of points on that. You nailed it, Blake. And I would say like the cool thing too on this is that the teams that I see that do it well really build that muscle around, kind of collaboration and that team sport element. Like we, kind of built a triumvirate, which was, kind of sales and success, product and marketing. And we met regularly and we talked about all the things that we were working together on, and then it doesn't just start, or it starts there, but it doesn't end there. I would say that, also, our AEs did, kind of regular deal reviews and they brought in all those teams to be a part of it. And it was an open invite that people could be a part of. And there was a Slack channel that we communicated some of these things. But it was, not a, look at us and what we're doing. It was more of, we needed more help probably, than we could talk about the successes. So we was great to bring them into kind of the problem solving with us to be able to talk about like, here's a big customer, big opportunity. If we could do this, faster, if we could prioritize this faster, this is what it would mean to the company. And that was a really neat thing. We even, have a great CS leader. And I think, we've talked a bit about CS, but it's like CS has had like the most massive resurgence. And I think it's such a, critical element about this. It's right there with data. I'd say, invest in your CS org and invest in your CS leaders there. But I had a great CS leader who, created what he called the heal desk, which is, kind of the opposite of a deal desk. But it was, customers that were in jeopardy of leaving us, like really big customers that had grown to a certain size and then hit stall points again. And it was great to come in and just talk about it and get everybody else's help to solve these problems. I thought he did a really great job, kind of leveraging, the other teams and bringing them in when the time was right to get their help, not just, being out there on the battlefield dying on his own or having his team feeling like they're getting beat up. So I think it really, is about, bringing all those parts together, embracing the team sport element, which isn't, I think some back to where we started here, I'd say, some overly SaaS companies of the past, it was, everybody has their lanes, everybody has their kind of silos, everybody kind of stays within, these swim lanes. And I think that the world is getting a little bit muddier. And I think that's pretty cool. Like I hear a lot about, product leaders being focused on, having I've heard the conversations around like, should product leaders have quotas? And I think that's a pretty cool one. But I think like your product leaders should care deeply about this, right? They should have a vested interest in, the success of the sales team. Your marketing leaders should feel the same way. And I think that, we really are kind of breaking down those traditional silos and swim lanes. And, I think that's the fun part about the companies that you see winning here.
Yeah, I think from an org design standpoint, PLG is part and parcel with cross-functional work and cross-functional operations together, really for all departments of an organization. And that's true at the early days. But what we're seeing here is that's very much true as you continue the journey and as you reach these new phases, including adding top-down and embracing the enterprise.
Yep.
So, John, this has been absolutely a great conversation. Back to where we started as a puzzle solver. This is a puzzle that many PLG founders are trying to solve themselves right now, and you've put all the pieces in place. So, thank you for the masterclass and the walkthrough of adding top down to PLG.
Awesome, I appreciate it. It's been great spending time with you.